It's a shame not to be kind of among you and seeing everybody. I've seen all these names pop up and lots of familiar names. It would be lovely to have a chat to, but it's really good to have you here in the virtual, and hopefully next year we can have a mixture of virtual and face to face to include everybody and allow that networking. But welcome again. It is a really important time for this conference. We've got COP22 around the corner. We really need to step up the pace of change. We've got a green recovery to deliver, and the current global events are showing the need for a more localized and fair transition to net zero. Our conference theme this year is community action to net zero. And today will be a great opportunity for communities and those working with communities to learn about CARES and to hear about some of the great projects and new approaches that we will hope will inspire you to take action and take things forward. You will have just a little bit of the kind of running order and how things will work. You've received an email from us with the joining instructions, and on that you've got all the links you need. All morning will be on this link, so if you drop out and need to come back in, just click back on that link and you'll join. If you have any IT issues or problems, do contact us at info@localenergy.scot and we'll try and help you out. For anyone who's just joined, I'm Chris Morris from Local Energy Scotland, and I'm just going to introduce the day. So this morning we are focusing our first session. We have 4 great speakers talking about community action to net zero. After that, we have our keynote speech, and we have Mr. Matheson, who's the Cabinet Secretary for Net Zero Energy and Transport. We then have a short break, and then our community stories, which is some great stories about projects that have recently been delivered. Our afternoon session focuses more on smaller workshops with 4 sessions at 1:30 and 4 sessions at 3, and you're very welcome to pick which session to come along to. If you didn't select a session, don't worry, the links to those sessions are on the same email as you used to connect to this, and you can choose which session is of most interest to you. Before moving on to our first session, I just want to introduce the Community and Renewable Energy Scheme, CARES. CARES' goal is to see communities across Scotland are engaging, participating and benefiting in the energy transition to net zero. And we have kind of 4 key themes that we support. We have the first, which is around shared ownership of projects. And that's when a community will work with a commercial developer, for example, to deliver a project and own a stake in that project. We support activities around local energy systems. We try and maximise the impact from community benefits locally, and we also help communities to develop and own and operate their own renewable energy projects, and these all contribute to the Scottish Government's target of 2 gigawatts of community and locally owned energy by 2030. In terms of Local Energy Scotland, we deliver the CARES contract for the Scottish Government. Our team has development officers, specialist support, and also fund administration. We have a number of resources that are there to help you deliver your project, and they're the CARES Toolkit, the framework of suppliers, case studies, good practice principles, and we also have funding to help you deliver your project, grants, loans, and also access to advisors as well. I hope you have a really good day today. You get a lot from the sessions, and we're happy to help you make connections with speakers and help with any follow-up afterwards. Just contact us. I'd like to thank all our speakers in advance. It's really their contribution and their time that really makes this event what it is. You can contribute throughout the day through our Twitter feed at Local Energy Scot, hashtag CARES 2021. And we have the chat function that I see some of you are using, which is fantastic. And our focus sessions will allow a lot more contribution in the afternoon. I'm going to move to our first session that will be hosted by my colleague Laura Campbell. Just a wee reminder, in the first session, if you could just turn your cameras off and your microphone off, that would be great. Okay, Laura, over to you.
Thanks very much, Chris. I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see that now. It's really exciting to be here virtually at the CARES conference, and I'm really glad that so many people could join us. We've got a great first session lined up for you. We've got 4 fantastic speakers. They're from a range of organisations, and they're going to talk you through what community action to net zero means to them. I'm going to start with Janet from Community Energy Scotland. Janet, hopefully you're ready to share your presentation. I'll stop sharing my screen now and you can try and share yours.
Good morning, everyone. Am I coming through loud and clear?
You are, yes.
Yeah, excellent. So I'm here to speak to you this morning about supporting the community energy sector, which has been the role of Community Energy Scotland since 2008. However, I'm a newbie. I started in this post in the 1st of April and have very much enjoyed taking up the legacy left to me by Nicholas Gubbins, our previous CEO. So we're a charity and we operate across the whole of Scotland. Community Energy Scotland's mission is perhaps now in language that we might like to change. We're looking a bit at this. But fundamentally, since 2008, we've looked at climate change. We've looked at the environment. We've had a holistic attitude to local renewable energy resources and how communities can use them. And then our second major piece of work is around fuel poverty, community benefit, and how those local resources can make communities' lives better. And a really good example of that are the women you see before you. This is Michelle and Eleanor with myself at the Fisherman 3 wind farm. And Michelle and Eleanor are from Berwickshire Housing Association. And the majority of the income from the Fisherman 3 wind farm goes to support affordable housing in Berwickshire. And that's a sort of best case practice. So one of the things we've been involved with this year, which actually is new to Community Energy Scotland, was the State of the Sector report. This is a report which is hosted by Community Energy England. We spoke to 72 community groups across Scotland. You'll see there in the map the distribution by wind, solar and water. Not difficult to work out those little logos. And here's a distribution map to show you where those community groups are. I think I'd like to highlight that 144 full-time equivalent staff are employed across these different community wind farms and community renewable projects. It's really important to know that community energy is a big employer and that many people have been upskilled and been able to have jobs in community energy in areas where they also would like to live, in the Western Isles, in Orkney and in Shetland. If we look at the community comparison between the whole of the UK and Scotland, I have to say that Scotland comes up very well. Now, since I started in April, that can't be down to me, but it is definitely the case that Scotland compares favourably with the rest of the UK, and much of that is to do with the fact that since devolution, the Scottish Government have created a very positive and supportive environment for community energy. And so you'll see that 110 megawatts of electricity is generated by the 72 in our sample, and there are more community groups than that, which compares to 319 megawatts across the whole of the UK. And the community benefit that is distributed by Scotland's renewable projects was £2,105,000 last year, which is a substantial proportion of the whole UK figure of £3,130,000. And so there was also direct financial support for COVID during the period that we looked at, and £125,000 in Scotland was invested in COVID. The only figure I would draw to your attention is the one in red, which is the new starts. And new starts in Scotland are low, lower than the national average, and that's something we might come back to through the day. Membership, we are a membership organisation and we have more than 420 members now, many of whom are community groups, community development trusts, community anchor organisations. Community membership's free and we provide peer-to-peer support, networking opportunities and information sharing. We do also provide services on a fee basis like project management, feasibility studies and technical advice. And if you're looking for a CARES grant, if you're here because you're interested in CARES, please speak to CARES first before you come to us so that we can follow all their procurement necessities. So community energy is about rural lives. We've got a project coming up starting in the new year called Network 76 in Motion, which is 6 communities just north of Dumfries. And multi-disciplinary initiative is one of those and one of our members. And a member from multi-disciplinary said this: the recent COVID emergency has increased our sense of remoteness, made us realise just how important our connections to other nearby communities are. And I think all over Scotland, we are feeling that way. And so the Network 76 in Motion project is going to help them develop sustainable transport links. And by transport, we don't necessarily mean big transport, trains and buses. It can be walking, cycling, people getting together and making relationships across those villages. Community energy is also about urban lives. Another member of ours is Greener Kirkcaldy, very much a flagship of the community energy group. And they have a PV array on the flat roof at the building in the picture there. And then they have a battery system inside the building. And one of the things I really like about Greener Kirkcaldy is they didn't hide their battery in a basement. If you hire their meeting room, which is very nice for functions, the battery's sitting there on the wall. And I think it's really important that we're proud of what we do in terms of encouraging renewables in Scotland. Community energy is about keeping affordably warm. One thing that we've got a lot of expertise now, we've been working on for 5 years, is heat pumps and heat in houses. The SMILE project in Orkney, which is the people you see in the picture, are very much part of that. And we're still working on that in the future, building upon the institutional shortcomings of tackling fuel poverty, just looking at buildings, at how heat pumps work, and how to get the best out of heat pumps. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, you're welcome to give us a call. Community energy is also about community buildings, and that's a big emphasis that CARES have this year, the Local Energy Scotland has this year. And this is Di. She lives in Rousey, which is north of Orkney Isles, and she is showing us the panel in her community centre that connects her heating system to the wind farm nearby, which is community owned, and then some of the energy from the wind farm, when it's curtailed or switched off, comes into Di's community heating system and many of the houses across the island. And Di's a good example of someone who has been upskilled and employed by community energy. She works for Heat Smart Orkney and has been supporting people with their storage heating systems. So community energy is also about decarbonising, and a lot of people would look at this picture of Rousey Community Garden and they would see the weeds. But I think it's much more important to see the polytunnel and the little wind turbine you can see at the back left, and the potential for the children of Rousey Community Primary School, which is just next door, to be gardening there. And we're really working on people not just being consumers, not just buying things and throwing them away, but rather being prosumers, being actively engaged in the whole cycle of the life of the things we buy. And being aware of the carbon we emit overseas when we buy green beans from Kenya or clothes made in China, or I've recently got a puppy, didn't many of us, and all those nylon dog toys and nylon dog harnesses, the things that we buy, just thinking about the carbon that is emitted overseas when we do that. And so the other way to turn that round is to think of community wealth, shopping local, and the 20-minute community. So thanks very much for hearing me speak this morning. It's been a real privilege to have this opportunity to tell you about our organisation. These are the wind farms in Evie on the mainland of Orkney, and the sunset behind them. And one thing I would say is that as we in Scotland have got used to wind farms being part of our landscape and part of our communities, I think Community Energy Scotland would be very quick to say that we have also benefited as a whole community from those resources, and that's something very important to us. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Janet. The chat is open for people to ask questions. What we'll do is we'll run through all the presenters first, and then we'll open out to questions at the end. So if you have got questions for Janet, if you want to put them in the chat, that's great. Our next presenter is Rebecca Ford from the University of Strathclyde, and she's going to share some of the learnings of the EnergyREV project. Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to hopefully share my screen successfully. It is, okay. Can you let me know if you can see just the full slide as opposed to the notes?
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I got a different option this time. I'm certainly not a Teams pro. So I'm so grateful to be here today and have the opportunity to connect with so many like really amazing and inspirational people working in this space. I'm going to talk a little bit less about community energy explicitly and a little bit more about local energy systems and the role that communities can play, and some of the thoughts I have around how we might need to go further to really ensure that we have a just transition for everyone across the sector. And I'm going to draw the insights from the work that I've been doing in the EnergyREV Research Consortium, and I'm just going to unpack that a little bit before I get started to contextualize what I'm going to be talking about. So EnergyREV is a research consortium that brings together 22 universities across the UK, and there's about 50 or 60 people working in there at any one time, and obviously it changes. Some people start, some people leave, and fundamentally what we're trying to understand is how new forms of smart local energy can really deliver value in non-traditional ways, or in ways that the kind of traditional system is unable to. But more importantly, how can that be unlocked at the pace and the scale commensurate with net zero? And as a research consortium, we're not working in a vacuum. We're working in what I like to think of as a collaborative innovation ecosystem, which is the Prospering from the Energy Revolution program. So this is a government-funded program that not only supports EnergyREV and the Energy Systems Catapult, but has also enabled the development of 14 very exciting innovation projects across the UK, and we're working closely with them and trying to learn from some of the activities. The other term I just want to unpack that I've used quite a lot is smart local energy systems, and I thought I'd give a couple of examples of some of the projects that we're seeing and what this really means, because there is no one local energy or smart local energy system. And so Orkney, I know, has been mentioned a couple of times. Janet talked about it. There is one of the innovation projects in Orkney. It's called Reflex, and it's about more than just a single technology. It's about developing and growing a whole load of new flexible and clean energy technologies to help manage the energy system in Orkney differently, not only to deliver grid benefits and maximize the use of the huge amounts of local renewable generation there, but also to support the development of new business models that can help address some of the issues around fuel poverty, for example. So really thinking about the technologies and how they're also managed and operated. Another example is in Oxfordshire through Project Leo. And in this project, they're not installing new technologies, but providing pathways for those technologies that are already owned by households and communities to participate in the grid in different ways. So really to maximize the use of local assets and support and empower communities there. And one of the really exciting things for me about this is that it's bringing together new forms of collaboration. So we're starting to see community groups work more closely with the energy industry and local government and local businesses and investors and academia to start to drive new forms of engagement, new forms of business models, and even to work together to help influence this evolving regulatory landscape that can allow further innovation to happen. And talking to some of the people involved in these projects, the reflections have been that this just wouldn't have happened by working in silos. So by bringing together these new forms of collaboration, we're starting to see larger opportunities to really influence the space and create wider system change. And this is really exciting, but it's also a lot more complex, and part of that complexity is around the new forms of value that this is creating. So they're going beyond just thinking about clean energy or greenhouse gas emissions, for example, by installing renewables, or beyond the financial considerations like reducing bills and so on, but also looking at how can these system projects and the changes that they're bringing, not just in technologies, but how the technologies are operated and the markets and so on, how can that also address fuel poverty issues? How can it grow prosperous and resilient communities and ensure that energy justice is embedded in the transition? How can it support the development of decent ongoing jobs in this industry? And beyond that, how can you think about wider environmental impacts like biodiversity gains or health impacts through having cleaner air? And whilst this is amazing and exciting, it also, for me, raises a few key questions. One of which is, when you're trying to deliver so many benefits, or where there's the opportunity to deliver so many benefits, how do we deal with the trade-offs between these priorities? So what happens when reducing bills is conflicted, for example, with biodiversity impacts? How do you prioritize? How do you manage that? And who gets a say in which of those outcomes are prioritized? What say do communities have in this, in this impact on the place where they live? And beyond that, I think, and related to that, is we need to think very carefully about the boundaries of where we're talking about these benefits. So let's just take the example of fuel poverty. Who gets that benefit? Is it just those households that have the time, capacity, resources, or agency to engage in this scheme? Or are there ways in which those effects can be felt more widely? And so, again, I want to acknowledge that I'm drawing insights from a very evolving landscape and the innovation projects, but what they're really highlighting to me is the need for more focus on access and inclusivity. So really opening up questions around who can and can't participate, who can and can't benefit from this project, and are some people being systematically excluded or even penalized? And what this raises for me is that these new sort of collaborations, these new system-wide projects really need new governance structures that support that inclusivity and ensures that the benefits and burdens are fairly distributed, and also that protects those people that don't have the capacity to meaningfully engage. And it's not, for me, looking just at the specific places where these smart local energy systems exist right now, but it's also thinking about, you know, how can other areas benefit from what's happening in one place? You know, Janet talked quite a lot about Orkney, and there's a huge amount of work going on there, but there are other areas around the country where there isn't that work. How can we make sure that those areas don't get left behind, but that we can start to learn about, you know, what's happening in the areas where there is a lot of action, and learn and translate these learnings so that other places can see what aspects might work for them, and in what combination in different geographical, technical, political, cultural, socioeconomic contexts. So what have we learned from Orkney? What have we learned from Oxford? What have we learned from all the other places that these exciting projects are happening? And to help understand how smart local energy systems can be created, cultivated, and grown in other places with different priorities, making sure that no place or community is excluded or left behind in this transition. And for me, one of the fundamental things to enabling this is changing the model by which we understand the impact of local action. So thinking differently about accountability and learning. So moving beyond what the kind of traditional model is around, you know, deploying new schemes or new technologies and then evaluating them in terms of did they success or did they fail, and starting to think more about more rapidly learning, iterating and improving, starting to understand what worked, how, why, and for who. And what that means is that we need to have the courage to fail and then to learn from those failures, as opposed to penalizing those failures. We need the structures that can support long-term and trusted relationships between community groups, local authorities, and the other stakeholders working together to deliver that change. Because without the trust, we won't be able to fail. We won't be comfortable with failure and learning. And so I think, you know, it's about moving away from the silos, out of comfort zones, and starting to work collaboratively to go beyond what any one partner could do on their own, and using this to make sure we can deliver a faster and a fairer transition to net zero. So I'm going to stop there, but I'm really excited about the discussion. If you're interested in any of the stuff I've talked about, please do visit the EnergyREV website, because there's a huge amount of resources on there, or reach out, because we'd absolutely love to engage. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Rebecca. That was a really interesting presentation, and great to hear about all the things that you've been doing with EnergyREV. We're going to move on to Sue Cairns now, who's the Deputy Director, Heat and Buildings Division at the Scottish Government. Sue, I'll share your presentation for you, and you can unmute yourself.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here at the CARES conference. Disappointing not in person. Really enjoy the CARES conferences over the years. I've been coming to them for about 16 years, I think, and always meet some really fantastic people who've got some great ideas and doing a lot of good locally. So thank you very much for having me. So I am head of the Heating Buildings Division, as Laura's said, and I'll be telling you today about our Heating Buildings programme, about some of the targets that we have, the pace and the scale of the change that we have to make in terms of heat, technologies that we'll be using, our commitments, I suppose, beyond what I'm going to say today, but our commitments for the next 5 years in that programme, and also how communities can play a really key role in that programme. So Laura, if you want to go on to the first slide. Thank you. So just a little bit of background. Draft Heating Building Strategy was published by the Scottish Government in February. I think we had about 178 responses. So if you haven't seen it yet, I wouldn't worry too much, as our final Heating Building Strategy is coming out very shortly. I would encourage you to have a look at that and see what we're doing. Because, as I hope you'll become clear in my presentation, this is something that's going to affect all of us. This is not just a nice to have at the side, it's really important, and that's why I think it's important that communities embrace this new agenda. The Heating Buildings programme, the strategy, comes out of the targets that we have, both in terms of climate change targets. You can see those really challenging targets to reduce our emissions by 75% by 2030. That's a huge reduction. We have new statutory targets for heat networks, legally binding targets there. You can see 6 terawatt hours capacity by 2030. Translating that, I think someone correct me online if I'm wrong, but I don't know, it's 500,000 homes equivalent if they were all to be actual individual households connected. And also in terms of fuel poverty, we have a target there that's very important to point out, our fuel poverty targets, because the two actually sort of have to work together, so that we have our heat targets that we're working towards, but we also have fuel poverty. And I'm sure it won't have escaped anyone's notice that fuel poverty is something in the news at the moment. It's been mentioned by both speakers so far because of the volatility in the energy market. And when you put heat decarbonisation into the equation, you are actually sort of coming up against fuel poverty targets, because the capital costs of renewable heating are more than gas, so up to 4 times the capital cost of a gas boiler to put in a heat pump. And in some to most cases, depending on the other factors in the particular building, it costs more to run. So therefore, by putting in renewable heating, you are having to think about very clearly about increasing people's costs and what can we do to reduce that. And I think that's also a point where communities can come in. Go on to the next slide, please, Laura. Thank you very much. Okay, so this shows the scale of what we have to do. So we've got that wider climate change target. In terms of heat, that means that our emissions in homes and buildings from heating need to fall by 68% by 2030. And that means we have to work hard on energy efficiency. So very significant progress towards all homes reaching EPC-C. It means the vast majority of the 170,000 off-gas homes that currently use fossil fuels, oil, LPG in the main, need to switch to zero emissions heating. And at least 1 million homes on gas need to switch to renewable heating, and the equivalent of 50,000 non-domestic buildings. So 1 million on gas homes by 2030 switching to zero emissions heating. We're talking Edinburgh and Glasgow together, the equivalent number of homes. We are talking about probably before the end of the decade, probably the second half of the decade, having to go faster than the natural rate of replacement of heating. At the moment, if you change your heating system, it's usually done as an emergency purchase. The system breaks down, you get a new boiler, and you're not thinking too much about it. Most cases, you just want a heating system that works. Sometime before the end of this decade, we are going to have to bring in regulation that accelerates the pace of that change, so that people are having to think about changing their heating, not only when the system is breaking down. Now that's quite something to think about, how you do that, what the trigger points are. But I'm just trying to kind of make this really clear to people. This is something that's not happening somewhere else, as in the electricity decarbonisation, which obviously communities have played a really big part in local hydro and wind schemes in the main. This is going to affect everyone, every single householder and business. And therefore, again, what can we do with our community energy that we've got in the widest sense, that volunteer energy, to actually smooth this transition, to help people make that change? Next slide, please, Laura. Okay, so thinking about some of the technologies for that. First of all, we're going to need energy efficiency. It's certainly a fabric first approach. There's no point putting in a new renewable heating system in a home with kind of leaky system, if you like. We need to get the buildings insulated well. So energy efficiency always comes first. We're talking about in off-gas areas, probably for the most part, heat pumps. We're talking about heat pumps in on-gas areas, and also low and zero emissions heat networks. The slides are going a bit crazy at my end, I think, Laura, but anyway, they're just about there. So heat networks are very important as well. I mentioned that statutory target that we have for heat networks. That can be easier if you think about it from the householder end. If you're linking into a heat network with a larger scale system, that can make it easier than making the change yourself. But we need a combination of both householders doing it for themselves and heat networks. Do you change again, please? So some of the commitments that we're making to deliver this transition through our heat buildings programme, we are going to invest at least 1.8 billion over this parliamentary session. So that's important to think about. I mean, it sounds like a lot of money. It is a lot of money. It's actually nowhere near the amount that will be needed in that time to actually do the transition that we need. So we do need a lot of private sector investment. We need individuals who are able to pay also to make that investment. But the Scottish Government is putting its money in to both pump prime the market, to protect the fuel poor, and also to demonstrate often in large scale cases, some of the technologies and systems, the kind of things that have been spoken about today, some of those smart systems across that time period. So I would say to you, in thinking as community groups, community energy groups, we've got CARES, and it's fantastic that we have CARES at the centre of this, but we are making this wider investment. And I would like to think that community groups get involved in and get the benefit from that wider investment too, and how we can get community groups involved in some of the larger schemes that we'll be putting money into. And that will be in the successor to our Low Carbon Infrastructure Transition Programme, which some of you may have heard of, LCITP. We'll be having a successor programme to that, and I would like to see community groups benefit from that and get involved in the projects. I would like to see communities get involved in some of the schemes that are trying to mitigate against fuel poverty, to think about how you can use some of your local funding, whether it's community benefits or some of the other work that you're doing locally, to think about fuel poverty, and also in terms of pump priming the market, being an advocate yourselves, thinking of actually doing this stuff yourselves and spreading the word locally. Public engagement, so we will be doing some public engagement for heating buildings. We can't just do this in a silo in Glasgow or Edinburgh in an office. You know, we have to actually get the message out there and let people know that this is coming along, so that if regulations, which is the third point here, come in the middle of this decade, that people are not seeing this as a surprise. I can think of a great example of that with the carbon dioxide, the alarms that came in. I can't even think of it myself now. The alarms for housing and the interlinked system for alarms, the fire alarms, and people coming in and basically saying when that came out, what's this? You know, we don't know anything about it. This is about trying to get people to understand what's coming along to a much bigger scale than just spending 200 quid on some interlinked alarms for your house. This is something much bigger than that, so we need to make sure that people are ready for it. Next slide, please, Laura. We'll also be developing a plan for supply chain. Obviously, at the moment, you know, when you're looking to do something to your house, I've heard lots of anecdotes about people saying, well, the supply chain isn't there locally. I can't, who do I trust? You know, there must, you know, possibly cowboys in the market and so on. We need to think about the supply chain. We're doing a lot of work on quality assurance and trust mark to make sure that people can actually trust the suppliers that they're getting in. The last thing you want is some really poor stories, some stories where people have had some difficult installations or problems with maintenance, and that then spreads around and puts other people off. So quality and quality assurance is really important, but getting the supply chain going is also important. And you'll all know that there's problems with that at the moment in terms of hiked up costs of materials, labour shortages and so on. So it's a really important area for us to work on. I mentioned earlier that our 1.8 billion is not going as far as we need. We need to think about how to lever in finance from elsewhere, and we're establishing a green heat finance task force by the end of this year to work with investors to actually bring some more interest into this sector. And I also mentioned, I've been talking about fuel poverty objectives. We want to make sure that in everything that we do in our Heating Buildings programme, we are taking fuel poverty into account. So we have some principles that we'll be working on to basically make sure that we are mitigating impacts on fuel poverty, and that we have schemes, as I say, to support the fuel poor through the heat transition. We have important schemes, Warmer Home Scotland and our area-based schemes, and we are putting more money into those and adapting them to make sure that in putting in renewable heating, we are also making sure that we're mitigating the impacts on the fuel poor, and that includes mitigating running costs as well. Next slide, please. So yeah, communities need to play an important role. I've talked about how I want that to happen. We want local energy challenges to be basically what the community groups are looking at. We want you to advocate for local change, champion change on a local level. Other people have spoken about the just transition, jobs and so on. I heard yesterday in another context that for every 1 gigawatt of commercial wind that's put in represents 1,600 jobs in Scotland. That's quite a good figure to have. And we've heard this morning, I think it was Janet who's mentioned the number of people employed in the community-owned schemes, which is really good news. So we need really to work on that. Yeah, CARES is our flagship community. We've got up to communities programme, sorry, we've got up to £5.25 million in the scheme for loan and grant funding this year. So please, do get involved in CARES. Laura and Chris, who've spoken already today, they feel passionately about the scheme. They run it really well. They're here to help, and it's free at the point of use, and can help you in schemes from onshore wind and hydro, if these are still viable, looking at ways to actually help you get these schemes going, to looking at more of the heat and community building side that I've been speaking about today. But it's basically in galvanizing that community volunteer energy and helping you get you on the right route. So please do use CARES. It's great. Next slide. And this is just a nice Scottish Government slide about our National Performance Framework, how basically there are wider things in heating building strategy, that wider benefits around networks, around avoiding pollution, and that's a really key thing that I think we're going to be looking at in terms of whatever regulation that we're able to do, that we may well be basing that on our powers to control and reduce pollution. So, I mean, there's a whole range of things there. I won't dwell on them. I think I probably said enough. I think that's my slides, Laura. I think one more summary here. Pace of change, really huge. I think hope I've basically made that clear to you. It's going to touch everyone's lives. I mean, I should have a tin beside me and put a pound in every time I'm talking to someone from the top of society, if you like, or business people, whoever. That suddenly a light bulb goes off halfway through the conversation, and they'll say, "What does this mean for me in my whatever it is home?" Because this does affect everyone. And I think, community groups can actually help make that transition smoother. So there you go. I think that's probably all I need to say. I'd be really interested to know what questions you have. But, I feel very passionate about trying to join the heat agenda up with the local and community energy agenda. And I hope you'll see that there is a reason to do that. There's funding there, and I really encourage you to get involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. That was great. I can see lots of questions coming in on the chat, so hopefully we'll be able to pick some of those up in a little while. Our next speaker is Joan Laurie. She's from Thurso Community Development Trust, and she's involved in the new climate action hubs that have recently been announced. So over to you, Joan.
Hello everyone. I'm afraid I don't have a presentation, mainly because we are so new as a climate hub. To explain a little bit of background, so I'm actually from Thurso Community Development Trust, and we have are going to be running one of the first pilots along with Aberdeen Climate Action Network for a regional climate action hub. To explain a little bit about the trust and to how we have arrived here at running the pilot, we are a relatively new development trust. We've only been in existence for 3 years now, but we have taken the approach right from the outset of everything that we do is completely evidence-based, is completely through community consultation. We have high levels of community engagement, and we've established a really good track record for having those high levels of community engagement. To any of you who might be aware or not aware of Thurso, we are the most northern town on the Scottish mainland. We're also a town that's in flux. Our main employer, the Dounreay Nuclear Power Station, is closing down. We've got predicted depopulation for Thurso and the wider Caithness area. And Thurso for a really long time has been maybe slightly different than other Highland towns in that it was a bit of a melting pot. A lot of people who have come here to work at Dounreay, even in the decommissioning process, and there really wasn't a sense of community here, and there was very widespread and perceived community apathy. And in 3 years, I think we've done quite a lot to turn that around. We've amassed a large range of projects, none in community energy as yet, not for the want of trying, but none as yet. But in community growing, we've been Climate Challenge funded. We're about to open a zero waste refill shop. We've done a huge amount of COVID support. But the thing that we really do is really, really well is that community engagement and getting people on board. So we're now a very established community anchor organisation, not just for Thurso, but for the wider Caithness area and within Highland networks as well. So based on that level of community engagement that we've been able to do, the fact that we're very proactive, the other thing that we have done is that we do not shout climate from the rooftops, but climate action is embedded in absolutely everything that we do, from very, very simple actions of even prior to COVID, you wouldn't have come to an outdoor event with us and been handed a disposable cup. You would have been given a mug because we've collected them up from the charity shops and we reuse them. We also, within that climate action, we're looking at climate action projects which also solve inequalities, so that all of that is embedded throughout everything that we're doing. And that's the sort of work that we're looking to bring to the North Highlands and Northern Isles Climate Action Hub, and based on the levels of community engagement that we've been able to achieve, one of the reasons why we've been selected to do it. So there are 2 pilots that are going to be running in the first instance, ourselves for the North Highlands and the Northern Isles, and I'll come back to our geographic area in a moment. And then Aberdeen and the Shire is going to be covered by NESCA, which is run by Aberdeen Climate Action. So we are funded for the first 6 months in this pilot phase to look at local needs, local communities' needs within our areas. When I said that I would come back to the geographical area, it's because we have a rather loose interpretation of what North Highlands and the Northern Isles means at the moment. For the Northern Isles of Orkney and Shetland, whilst we are covering them, it might be that through our engagement with community groups on the islands, that actually an islands hub would work better for them, and in which case we will gather up that evidence and help to promote an islands hub for them. Similarly, whilst we're North Highlands, if anybody is in Inverness or further Badenoch, Strathclyde, we also will not turn them away. We are just in the recruitment phase. I actually spent all day yesterday interviewing, and we are looking to have 2 to 3 development officers who are spread across Highland, and 1 islands development officer, along with a communications and marketing person. We are looking to work with both existing networks in the areas and look to see if there's new networks that we need to build. We're working very closely with Highland Adapts, which has been put in place through a partnership with statutory organisations to look at adaptation in our area. There are some really strong networks already in Highland, but there's also quite a lot of areas where groups are not necessarily doing any form of climate action at all. And even there are groups who might be doing a project which is climate, they're not thinking of it as climate action. So good example is putting a renewable heating source into a community building, but there could be more engagement that they could be doing with their communities. What we're looking for is community groups to use what they're doing as an example, to be influencers within communities, and to also really look at that link between what a climate action project can do to also solve local needs. So fuel poverty being a very significant one of those issues. I'm up here in Caithness and we export significantly more energy than we ever use, but we've got some of the highest fuel poverty levels in the country. So what can be designed, developed, achieved? So the work of the hub will be signposting to organisations like CARES, and to other organisations, also learning, encouraging communities to learn from each other as to what they've been able to do, encouraging really this a very local response, so local solutions. We'll also be working with, there are 2, in addition to the hubs, the other thing that's been put in place is climate action towns, and I think there's 6 throughout Scotland that Architecture Design Scotland are working with. So 2 are actually in our patch in Alness and Invergordon. So we'll be working with them. There's been no history of climate action projects there, and what we can help to develop and deliver on for them. So we can help with literally anything from community engagement to funding applications to ensuring that projects are sustainable. That's a really big thing to us. we and an example of what we've been able to do, even though it's not energy, it's community growing, is we were funded for 2 years by the Climate Challenge Fund for our Thurso Groves project. We are now, luckily, we have another 2 years worth of lottery funding for that project. But in this 2 years, we're establishing commercial greenhouses for growing and a zero waste refill shop, which will then take over the on funding exit from the lottery to ensure that our community garden, with all the health, well-being, social isolation, food benefits that brings, so that there is there's less reliance on grant funding. And we'd like to help more community groups to be able to create sustainable projects like that are not reliant on funding, that there is somewhere to go to afterwards and they can be sustainable in the long term. I think that's me now, Laura.
Thank you very much, Joan. If people do have questions, please stick them in the chat and I'll take a look and see if we can bring some forward. I've got a couple of questions just to kick us off. So if our speakers would like to come back in, that would be great. Try and spotlight you all so that we can see you. Okay, hopefully that's you all in now. So my first question for the panel is that the Scottish Government have set ambitious targets to get Scotland to net zero, with very big changes needed to get us there, as Sue's already highlighted in her presentation. What are the key things that community organisations can do to help accelerate the pace of change and create an impact? Who would like to come on that one first?
Do you want me to start?
Yeah, go for it, Sue.
Okay. I think, as I tried to highlight in my presentation, it's fantastic that community energy groups are already there. You've got 15 to 20 years, some of you, of experience in this, of getting wind turbines up, of hydro schemes and other sort of local activities. I think, you know, it'd be great if you can think about turning some of that energy towards the heat in buildings issue for net zero, because it is such a large transformation that's needed. And that can be through community buildings, through CARES, because there is the call for the net zero community buildings, so there is support for that. And to also think about acting as advocates in your community for what needs to be done in this transition, and thinking about how community energy groups can do their bit towards helping mitigate fuel poverty, but also some of the larger scale, some of the innovative thinking that Rebecca was talking about, and some of the larger schemes, getting involved in those, some of the bigger schemes, heat networks, any of these infrastructure schemes. There's a lot of support out there from the Scottish Government. So I think you're in a really good place to be able to help. It's the start of the CARES contract, pretty early on in this contract. And I would like to think that CARES can do what it can to bring in all these different things to point you in the right direction and make sure you get involved and bring those benefits to your local community.
Thanks, Sue. Rebecca, I think you had your hand up next. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks. I think that often when you're looking at sort of top-down change, which is absolutely critical, and like I love the fact that there's a really nice, strong, clear direction from Scottish Government. It's very useful. But it feels like it often starts with the problem that needs changing. Whereas when I've talked with community groups, I feel like I hear a very different story, and you hear about what is powerful in that community and where there is excitement and ambition and desire to build on that. And so I think that there's a real opportunity in bringing in community groups and supporting joining these pieces together and making sure that, you know, we're not just delivering this climate action, but we're also growing what's really strong in communities and empowering and delivering these multiple other benefits that perhaps are not even situated within the energy space. I mean, we talked about fuel poverty and social equity and jobs, but there's so much more in terms of the coherence, the mental health challenge. Like, I didn't even talk about any of that. I think that the question also needs to be reframed, not just what community groups can do, but what support. So a lot of people that work in community groups probably like overstretched, volunteering their time, and it is a challenging environment. And while it's really exciting and great to have the care scheme, I think there also needs to be kind of this recognition. You know, I often think about this for local authorities as well, like that they're very, very stretched. And I think that community groups need to be valued a lot more in this system, because I think they've got a huge amount to offer.
Thank you, Rebecca. Janet.
Well, what a great point to come in on. I mean, I would say if anyone's valuing community groups in this sector, it would be us, and cares alongside it. We really do value community groups, and I think we need to have a two-way conversation. I think we need to get rid of that feeling that there's any kind of conflict between top down and bottom up. We're really looking like a spider's web. That's what we want across Scotland. We want everyone from government, local authority, community groups, facilitation organisations like ourselves to be working together in a spider's web of interconnection, where there's no feeling of, you know, how did he get that then, or whose job was that, or who's going to knock the head off the puppy first, or all those things that I'm afraid some Scottish people do, but all people do. Instead, we need to work together, and we do absolutely value community voices. I would encourage any community group here to join Community Energy Scotland and to have that chance to share. It's not an easy road. This is not an easy thing to do. And I think when we all look at the heat and building strategy, it's not easy. It's not easy for government. It's not easy for individuals. It's not easy for communities. It's not an easy shout. So any support that you would like, you know, get in touch with us, talk about it with your cares team. That support is out there for people. It really is. And I would really like to emphasise that we're here for communities. That is what we do.
Thank you, Janet. I like the idea of the spider's web. Very nice way of putting it. Joan, please.
I think Janet said pretty much what I was going to say, is that, yeah, it's about joining all of the dots together, making all of the connections, and communities feeling that they're supported. You know, communities can have really innovative, amazing ideas, and they know their local areas best. They know what will work, and they know what they need. But it's making sure that they can then be supported on that journey, because particularly when you come to some projects, even if you get through all of the hurdles, you then suddenly have this massive amount of money that you have to try and handle, and it's really daunting. So I think it's making sure that they have that support that's in place. And yeah, having the spider's web explained it perfectly. Yeah.
Great, thanks. We've got another 5 minutes or so before we're hopefully joined by the Minister. So I'll try and pick up some of the questions in the chat, but just before that, Sue mentioned in her presentation, you know, the volatility of the energy markets, energy prices rising at the moment. What do you think this means for community and local energy, and what might this mean for people in fuel poverty as well? And I know, Sue, you've touched on this already, but if others want to come in as well, that would be great. Thanks. Anyone want to go first? Janet.
I'm having real trouble with my hand. Sorry about that. If I'm waving at you, putting my hand up and down, that's me. And yes, I think this is really important. And it's so here's where the rubber hits the road, is that if you were looking to set up a community renewable energy project, you need to have predictions for the bank. You need to have predictions that say what your renewable energy project might earn. And there was a real drop in bank predictions when the FIT, the feed-in tariff, ended. However, if energy prices are going to be high and stay high, then those sums can be recalculated, and community energy projects might well find that they're a lot more viable than the bank said they were 6 months ago. The difficulty is that could then change tomorrow, and none of us in this meeting are in charge of the energy prices. We don't have that level of control. So it's a good thing. I think the thing that community energy groups should do is strike while the iron's hot on the renewable energy side of things. From the fuel poverty side of things, it's exactly the opposite. So the difficulty is then that people in fuel poverty often have higher than average bills. I don't know if anyone has lived in a flat. When I was a student, I rented a flat from the Co-op, and we had an electricity card. And you went down to the post office. I am showing my age. But if anyone had one that took shillings, then you'll be older than me. But you know, the costs for people in fuel poverty are often higher than the costs of people who can do direct debits, or people who are able to put solar panels on their roof or buy a Tesla battery. So as soon as the energy prices go up, the fuel poverty bites harder. And I think that's something we really, really need to look at. So it's good for renewable energy community groups, but it's not good for the fuel poverty side of things.
Thanks, Janet. Rebecca, you'd like to come in?
Yeah, I just want to add that I think that for me, I always get amazed how we still often kind of separate out supply and demand like they're separate things, when actually if we start addressing some of our kind of demand side, it will also impact on the supply side. The challenge, I think, in thinking about these things in a siloed way, and particularly when you start to think about it on an individual household basis, is that the finance just doesn't add up. And I'm not involved in it directly, but I know that there is really great work going on looking at kind of new forms of finance model for place-based action, where you start to bring together all of these different parts of the puzzle, bring together different finance models. And I think that that needs to be incorporated and embedded in change. And we need to move away from this siloed, like one sector at a time or one household at a time, to kind of whole place-based action that communities can play a part in.
Thank you, Rebecca. That's great. I think I saw a bit in the chat about a few people coming in on long-term support for community groups and core funding to help them to get to net zero. Is that something that the Scottish Government can help with, or do people have views on that? Anyone want to come in?
That's a very difficult one, I think, Laura. And obviously a lot of support has been given to community groups in the past and currently through the Climate Challenge Fund, and that's been really helpful. But I know that always in that it's been encouragement to community groups to find some more sustainable way of basically making themselves a going concern in the future. I know Janet has had to look at that, or her predecessor has, in terms of Community Energy Scotland, which is one of the reasons why you got involved in the Berwickshire sort of wind scheme, to try to get an income so that you could take your mind off having to find grants from here, there and everywhere to keep yourselves going. And I think that's one thing that CARES, again, can help with. It's looking for that income so that you can keep yourself going locally. It's quite hard for the Scottish Government to provide ongoing support on the core funding side, but it's certainly something that we're very aware of.
Thank you, Sue. That's great. I think that's the end of our session now. So thank you all for joining us and sharing your thoughts and ideas. That's been a really interesting session for me. Thank you for your participation, and a virtual round of applause to you all. I think we've now been joined by Michael Matheson, so I'm just going to allow him into the room. Say thank you and goodbye to all of you.
Thanks, Laura. That was an excellent session. Thank you very much for that. Hopefully we have Mr. Matheson available, and Laura, yep, we've got you there. We can see you now. So we are, hello, Mr. Matheson. We're delighted that you're able to come to our conference and make the keynote address. Mr. Matheson is the Cabinet Secretary for Net Zero Energy and Transport, and we're really grateful that he's making this address, particularly at this busy time. You know, his portfolio includes COP26, coordination of net zero policy, renewable energy and energy efficiency. So it's going to be really fantastic for us all to hear from him. So at this point, I'd like to now welcome you, Mr. Matheson, and invite you to make the keynote address.
Thank you very much for your introduction, and I'm delighted to be able to join you for the conference today. And I think it's very well titled as Community Action for Net Zero, because it's important that our communities play their part in helping to support Scotland in becoming a net zero nation. This is, of course, a long-standing and popular event in the community energy calendar, and one that I'm delighted to be able to join I'm particularly pleased going through the attendee list to see how many community groups are actually taking part in this event, including those from across our island communities, which is extremely encouraging. We've become accustomed, though, unfortunately, to not being able to meet in person for events over the course of the last 18 months. Although we have very much adapted to the virtual meetings, I do hope that next year that we'll be in a better position and hopefully able to meet face to face again. The COVID-19 pandemic has had an unprecedented global crisis and has fundamentally changed just about every aspect of our lives here in Scotland and for people right across the world. While there are many challenges that still lie ahead for us, there are also important opportunities in this time of change. But of course, the climate emergency has not gone away, and we are seeing its real impact now. In our recovery from COVID-19, there is also an opportunity for us to rebuild our society and our economy in a greener, fairer and also in a more sustainable way, while making sure that we tackle the climate emergency. Our climate change plan update, which we published back in December 2020, puts a green recovery front and centre as we respond both to the pandemic and also to the climate emergency. Our transition to net zero is set out, and the targets that we've set out to become a net zero nation will become all the more visible as Glasgow prepares to host COP26 conference in Edinburgh this year. It's a fantastic opportunity for Scotland. It's fantastic for Scotland to have the opportunity to host this particular event, but it's also an opportunity to highlight Scotland's commitments to sustainability and the decarbonisation of our energy generation globally. That's what my role is as Cabinet Secretary for Net Zero. Excuse me. In terms of our net zero goals, in June we established our Let's Do Net Zero campaign, which aims to call for action to help us achieve our net zero target. The campaign provides the tools and the information to allow communities to explore how they can play a key role in working to solve local energy challenges. As mentioned at the time of its launch, we can of course be proud that we have already halved our greenhouse gas emissions since 1990 here in Scotland. The second half of the journey to becoming a net zero nation will be far more challenging and it will require us all to play a part. And I'm very much encouraged that everyone here today wants to play a part in realising these ambitions. CARE has had and will continue to have a critical role in supporting community-led action in achieving our net zero targets. Since the scheme's inception back in 2013, CARE has supported over 600 community and locally owned projects throughout Scotland, offering funding of over £54 million to date and provided advice to over 900 different organisations. Our current CARE's funding call is aimed directly at community organisations who want to decarbonise their community buildings. The response so far has been tremendous, with over 200 notes of interest and some applications already moving through the funding assessment and the approval stages. Once such projects have received CARE's support in the past, one of the projects which received support in the past was the Green Craig Community Wind Turbine Project, which is based just outside my constituency in Falkirk, which I had the pleasure of opening and visiting in July of this year. What struck me was the commitment of the local community to taking it forward as a community-based project. They have invested themselves in renewable technology to help to support achieving our renewable energy targets. And they also, through the scheme, it provides them with an income stream to support the project to support projects to enhance the outdoor experience within their local area. And I was pleased to note in your programme today includes other examples of projects which have received support, highlighting the support that CARES can provide, but also how it can enable communities and organisations to have that positive impact on their local community. Scotland's communities continue to have a crucial role to play, not only in working to solve local energy challenges, but through acting as powerful advocates for local change. We're committed to a just transition to becoming a net zero nation, one that has the local communities with people who live and work there very much at the heart of the transition. This will ensure that the costs and benefits of the transition are spread fairly and that everyone has access to support and advice to take part. The net zero challenge is most acutely felt in the decarbonisation of heat, where we have made some progress in recent years. We face a huge challenge in how we reduce emissions from our homes and buildings. That's why our current CARES contract includes a much greater focus on supporting communities to decarbonise their buildings. While CARES has supported a number of heat projects over the years, we now need to see a transformational shift. Far more work is needed in this area going forward. We need to at least decarbonise some 1 million homes and an equivalent 50,000 non-domestic buildings in order to meet our 2030 targets. And in the next 5 years, the Scottish Government will be allocating at least £1.8 billion to support the accelerated deployment of heat and energy efficiency measures in homes and buildings right across the country. With such a significant investment, it's imperative that we also seize the significant benefits and the economic opportunities that the transition presents. In February, we launched our consultation on our draft heat and building strategy, which set out actions to decarbonise Scotland's building stock in line with our climate change targets. We've listened to the feedback from stakeholders and we remain committed to publishing our final strategy as soon as possible. This will outline again the need for urgent action to be taken by the UK Government to act in areas of reserve policy areas in order to help to support a rapid and just transition in this area. The Scottish Government strategy will provide the foundations for Scotland's transition to renewable heat, whilst also ensuring that the opportunities from the transition are also accessible to everyone. So drawing my remarks to a close, I'd like to take this opportunity though to thank Local Energy Scotland for their hard work in putting together what is a very interesting and informative conference today. The Scottish Government remains very much committed to ending Scotland's contribution to climate change by 2045 in a just and fair way. And that's why the Scottish Government has committed to a green economic recovery from COVID-19. Going forward, it's essential that the Scottish Government's commitment to net zero is one which is just and also delivers a thriving and sustainable economy that works for all. Working together, I believe, can give us the confidence we need to achieve what is very ambitious statutory climate change targets we have here in Scotland. So I wish everyone well with the conference, and I'm happy to respond to any questions that colleagues may have online. But thank you very much for your attention this morning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Matheson. That was great and great to get your input. We invited delegates that registered last week to submit some questions, so we'll perhaps start with them. We've got 10-15 minutes to deal with some questions, so we'll start with them, and I'll try and pick out other ones as they come into the chat, if that's okay with you, Mr. Matheson. How long have we got you for? Is it till 11? Oh, you're muted at the moment, but I think it's 11. So. Perfect. Okay, well, the first question we've got in is from David Somerville, who's a trustee of Transition Edinburgh and also of Community Energy Scotland. And he would like you to outline the key ways in which he hopes to support community-led initiatives for owning and benefiting from renewable energy installations, but also citizen contributions to governance of installation projects, reducing demand for energy-efficient energy altogether. So what roles can community-led initiative have for renewable energy installations and for citizen contribution to the governance of installation projects?
Okay, so thanks for that question. Well, as you may be aware, the Scottish Government provides support to communities for the development of community and also local energy projects. And we do that through CARES, where we provide support to communities looking to own or to even take a stake in a renewable project, which can help, which can also be assisted through the help of the local Energy Scotland advisors who can provide advice and assistance on these issues. This year alone in CARES, we have made available some £5.25 million, which is there to assist community groups to develop renewable energy projects, supporting the growth of community and also locally owned energy projects at a local level. It's worth keeping in mind, on top of the funding which is available from the Scottish Government, there's also, I think it's around £3 million, which is available in grid upgrade support, which can support some of particularly Scotland's more remote and rural areas which are off grid, where there is a need for an upgrade to the energy systems alongside looking at trying to develop a local energy project in itself. So there is some funding which is available through other routes to assist in doing that. The other aspect that he raises the issue around how community groups can be involved in helping to decarbonise or to create greater energy efficiency within the local area, and that's one of the focuses of the present funding round, is to look at how we can encourage local community groups to be identifying locally owned buildings which could be made more energy efficient. A big part in helping to decarbonise domestic and non-domestic heating systems is not just through the creating buildings which are more energy or making the systems net zero, but it's also making the buildings reducing their energy usage overall. So we want to get that balance right, and that's why in the existing funding round we've given a particular focus to encouraging community groups to look at how they can identify community assets that could actually be better insulated in order to reduce their need for energy in the years ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. And it is great to sort of make sure we keep that focus on insulation and energy efficiency measures in kind of any project we develop, and we're really keen to support that. The next question we've got has come up a few times actually during the morning session, and it's a really important issue, and it's from Linda Mitchell from Ali Energy in Oban. And it's, how do you expect the transition to net zero to align or not to the Scottish Government's fuel poverty targets?
Well, the reality is that we need to make sure that our transition to a net zero society is one which is fair and just, so that no individual or community is left behind. And that includes individuals who struggle with the cost of their fuel use. I've been involved over the course of the last couple of weeks in calls with a whole range of ministers from across the UK about the very significant spike and increase that we're seeing in the cost of wholesale energy prices and the potential impact that will have on domestic customers. There is no doubt in my mind the increasing costs in energy we're experiencing just now will result in more people falling into fuel poverty, and we need to look at what action we can take to try and help to mitigate that, and we're pressing the UK government to try and address this. But it's important as we move forward with the transition that we do so in a way that does not put more people into fuel poverty. So we know that using some decarbonised heating systems can be more costly than that of existing heating-based systems, which are carbon-based systems. But we also need to look at how we can address that, and how we can also look at pooling some of our resources. So one of the areas that I'm particularly keen in exploring is the greater use and expansion of district heating, but also within that the opportunity to look at using heat as a service, and how that can help to limit the costs that households face when it comes to meeting their heating costs. So it will be important, and it's an important element within the Scottish Government's own statutory targets for fuel poverty, where by 2040 no more than 5% of our households across the country should experience fuel poverty, and we need to make sure that we're doing everything to continue to drive that down. But recent fuel prices will clearly have an impact, but we need to make sure that we manage a transition in a way that reduces the risk of individuals being exposed to fuel poverty. And that's a combination of looking at different models of deployment of zero carbon heating, while also reducing the need for people to make use of energy by greater insulation and energy efficiency within properties themselves. Okay, thank you very much for that. The next question we got is from Bill Anderson, who's a development manager at Carluke Development Trust. And he wanted to know, how will the Scottish Government ensure that all the fantastic learning generated by community energy projects is shared as fully as possible? And how can we develop and expand the community business partnership model currently underway in Carluke? Well, look, I think that's a really good point, because I'm very keen to make sure that the learning which we've had from this particular development is captured, and we utilise that and allow other communities to benefit from it as well. And I should also take this opportunity to commend the Development Trust on the way in which they have taken forward some of this work within their area. Of course, it's through conferences just like this that communities can also learn and share experience, and they can also share the skills that they've got from their own local energy projects, and they can also demonstrate models that they believe are working effectively from them. I understand that I think it's Local Energy Scotland have also made available case studies which can be used for sharing and learning purposes, which individuals can get access to. So I would want to encourage people to make use of that, but we'll certainly look to see if there's more we can do to try and help to spread the positive experience that some of the development trusts have had, to try and help to support other communities that may be looking to follow a similar model, to ensure that they get the best learning from the experiences of those who've already been through this process. Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think a lot of that sits with us as well, running CARES, to make sure that we try and deliver events and ways of cascading information and getting the real detail of projects and the learning from that. So, I think there's much to do to try and replicate those good ideas and to try and accelerate progress. The next question is from Lucy Gilly from Southseeds, who's the general manager there. And this again has come up quite a few times in the chat, so a really good question to cover. How are community-led projects in urban areas expected to pursue the development of renewables when the answers are so much more complex due to the lack of natural resources to harness and the lack of space to deliver projects? Here in Glasgow Southside, we are looking at everything, including running grid balancing service, but it's hard to know if we can keep going until we are able to set something up in a year or so's time. Well, okay, I recognise that no one size fits all. So So, you know, our urban areas don't have access to the same natural assets that some of our rural communities may have, but they also have access to assets that can be utilised. So one of the things that maybe not for the south side of Glasgow, maybe slightly too far away, there are assets such as the River Clyde, and I know that there have been proposals on how we can capture the use of the River Clyde as helping to provide renewable energy for a large part of the city centre, and that's a part of Glasgow City Council's ambitions going forward through what would largely be a district heating system. So, you know, I acknowledge and recognise that not one size fits all. We need to look at different models that can be deployed in different areas. You know, I was recently at a project which was a district heating system in the south side of Glasgow, which is which has been developed through our local energy programme and is delivering a local energy to a significant number of properties. We need to look to see where we can deploy more of these. They are net zero, but they don't use the same natural assets of wind and water in the way in which some rural communities may be able to. But we need to make sure that we're looking at all of the opportunities that can be applied in urban areas as well, but also to try and do that in a collective way. So one of the things I would say in particular about urban areas is that I think a mistake to make is to think that in trying to decarbonise the heating systems of 1 million homes between now and 2030, that people think that we should simply just replace everybody's gas boiler with a ground source heat pump or an air source heat pump. In my view, we need to look at how we can also create community-based heating programmes that we can make use of, rather than simply replacing every home's heating system. And if we look at parts of Europe, that's not an unusual approach. It's an approach that they've had in place for many decades. And I think we need to make sure we learn from them and how we deploy net zero technology, particularly in urban areas.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. It's good to cover that. There's a few coming in the chat as well. We've only got a couple of minutes left, but what I will say is if there are questions we don't cover, we'll try and pick them up and send responses afterwards to these. But we had a question in about, is there a possibility of providing core funding for community groups to employ staff to supplement volunteer efforts and to build capacity to help tackle net zero?
So I understand that the challenges that local organisations can face. You'll also recognise there's a limitation to what the Scottish Government can actually fund as well. What we try to do is we try to fund organisations that at a national level that can provide expertise and knowledge, and can also help to facilitate the sharing of information and experience in different parts of the country, just like we're doing here today, through organisations like Local Energy Scotland, to try to help to support local groups, because it is probably, frankly, impossible for the Scottish Government to fund voluntary organisations across the country to carry out much of this work. I recognise that volunteers play such an important role in helping to deliver on these projects, as I witnessed in the project just at the edge of my constituency a couple of months ago. But what we, from the Scottish Government's focus, is that we want to try and help to support national organisations that can assist local organisations in taking forward projects to ensure that they're getting the right type of advice and information and support in developing any proposals in their area. Okay, thank you very much for that. And I'd encourage anyone who hasn't to sign up to our newsletter so we can stay in touch with you, because there are things like Ofgem Redress Fund that can provide funding for energy advisors and staff in local communities. So there is other funding out there, and we always try and signpost to it and make people aware of it. So, but it is a particular challenge. I have many more questions. There's more in here. What I'd suggest, we will pick out some of the questions we've not managed to cover and just drop you an email with responses where we can. But I'd really like to thank you very much for speaking at the CARES conference this year, for sharing your thoughts.
and for agreeing to take questions at the end as well, which is really great. In terms of everybody else, I think this has been a really good start. We're back on this same link. You can just leave it open, or you can just click back in on the same link. Go and grab a cup of tea. Get yourself ready again for kind of more questions and engagement, and we'll come back at about 11:15, so in 15 minutes, when we will hear from 4 absolutely amazing projects and gain some insight from them. So I'll see you back here in 15 minutes, and if we could all give a kind of virtual clap for all the speakers this morning. It's been a really good start to the day. So thank you very much, and see you everyone in about 15 minutes.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. If people do want to hang on for another 5 minutes before you get your cup of coffee, we've got a video that we'd like to share with you.
Thanks, Laura.
Sorry, folks, just having a few technical hitches here, but we will try and play the video for you at the start of the next session. So do come back and at 11:15, and we'll restart then.
Okay, thanks, Laura. Hello, everybody. We'll just start in a couple of minutes. As we said before, we're going to just start this session 3 on community stories by playing a short video just in a couple of minutes. But we'll just let a few more people back in. And we're ready to start soon. And good to see you there, Agamemnon. Okay. Great. Everybody, just I hope you've all had a good cup of tea and are ready for the next session. And like I said on earlier, we will try and pull the questions to the Minister we didn't get through and see if we can get with some responses to them and send them back to you in due course. And Agamemnon, yep, we'll switch everything on in a wee second. Perfect. Okay, Laura. Laura Claire, should we try and play the video now, and we'll start the session with that, and then we'll move on from there.
We're living in a climate emergency. We need to act now to cut our carbon emissions to reduce warming and the negative effects on our climate, and to protect our world for future generations. The Scottish Government is committed to ending Scotland's contribution to climate change by 2045 in a just and fair way. This is why the Scottish Government is committed to a green recovery after the pandemic. A green recovery is the Scottish Government's commitment to transition to net zero emissions in a way that delivers a thriving, sustainable economy that works for all of us, delivering a better world, a more equal world, a world of greater opportunities, and a natural environment that is vibrant and diverse. The Scottish Government's Community and Renewable Energy Scheme, CARES, helps communities to transition through renewable energy projects. CARES is a one-stop shop for communities wanting to put their renewable energy ideas into action. We help fund local community renewable energy projects, and our network of development officers and specialists give free and expert advice to communities every step of the way, helping communities to reduce their carbon footprint and save energy, helping to create a healthier, happier and more successful nation. Since 2010, CARES has provided £54 million in funding to make Scottish communities greener. We've supported over 600 projects across Scotland and provided advice to more than 900 organisations. Braehead Community Garden installed solar panels and now generates its own electricity. Loch Ness Hub installed air source heat pumps, a low carbon heating system, and has reduced its carbon emissions and energy bills. Green Craig near Falkirk built its own wind turbine and uses the money it makes to invest in local community projects. Service invested in Corrimony Wind Farm, providing them with a sustainable income that will empower their community for years to come. From Applecross on the west coast to Aberdeen and beyond, local communities have developed hydropower to generate their own energy and provide income to their communities. CARES can help more Scottish communities to embrace renewable and greener methods of generating energy and heat, help more communities to reduce their carbon footprint and emissions, help more communities to understand that being greener saves money and protects precious resources for the future, helping Scotland to achieve its net zero targets. net zero by working together. And now is the time to act.
Great, thank you very much, Claire and Laura. I think that was brilliant, and it's fantastic to see all some of the different projects, and yeah, it was a really great video. So thanks very much for that. Welcome back, everybody. My name's Chris Morris, and I'm just going to host the next session we have today. Hopefully, Laura's unlocking, just allowing all the speakers on. This is often one of my favourite bit of the conferences. We do it every year, where we hear from community energy projects that have recently delivered and built out. And we've got 5 speakers who are going to share their stories and talk us through things. We're going to start off with Agamemnon, who's going to talk about the Energy Garden. And Agamemnon was the CEO, co-CEO of Repowering, and recently left to set up the Energy Garden. We've got Dan McCallum from Wales, who's going to talk about the Energy Co-op, and also Awel Amantawa in Wales, 2 projects they've been involved in. Dave Bennett from Bespoke Community Interest Company is going to talk about one of the projects you saw on that video, actually, which is the recently commissioned 900 kilowatt community-owned Greencade community wind turbine, which was commissioned in March. And also we've got Angus Robertson and Nick Tordoff from Moorvolts, who are going to talk about the Bar River Community Hydro Project, which we reckon is the largest community-owned hydro project at 1.6 megawatts, which was commissioned in July. So I'm going to, what the plan is, we'll run through each of the, we'll get an introduction to each of the projects, hear about the work they've been doing, and then we'll open up to question and answer via the chat, and a couple of themes we can pick up as well. So I will pass you over to Agamemnon first, who's going to talk to us about the Energy Garden. And I think, Agamemnon, you're dialing in from King's Cross, so hopefully everything works okay.
Yeah, well, tell me, can you see?
We can see you, yeah, and we can see your screen as well.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. And how's the sound?
It's pretty good, considering. Yeah, it's all good.
Okay,
we can hear you.
Do I need to hold this up here, or is it good there?
It's good there. I'll wave if we can't hear you.
Fantastic. Okay, so if I just want to check in with my tech first. So Energy Garden, cultivating community and sustainability is on your screen, yeah? Yeah, okay, cool. Yep. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. I was having a quick chat with Chris, and I said I have a deep connection to Scotland. It's very, over the last, 20 years, I've had an incredible relationship. My goddaughter lives there. But I also, when I first came to this country, I had a good year to spend up in the Highlands near Elgin and Forres. And so I just think that it's a shame that the rest of the country isn't as clued up as Scotland is, and you guys have done amazing work, and it's just an honor to be here. So, as Chris said, I co-founded a bunch of cooperatives, from Brixton Energy Solar 1, 2, 3, Brixton, Hackney, to Repowering, which was sort of developing community-owned renewable energy on social housing, to Energy Garden. And I did step down this year to become the chief exec of Energy Garden, which we fostered inside of Repowering for the last 7 years. And really, it was more than just renewables. It was about cultivating community. And any of you out there who know what it is to be a community organizer, that when you begin to get people's attention, they don't just care about solar or wind or hydro. They care about making the world a better place. And they want to make sure that their families are warm and everyone has opportunity. And so we really found the same thing when we put solar panels on the social housing block in 2011 in Brixton. They all wanted the space that didn't have solar, they wanted green roofs. So I set about trying to cultivate an idea for a sustainable program that could go beyond the individual social housing blocks that Repowering became known for, and move into a citywide approach where we could work with the network operators, whether it's the district network operator, the National Health Service, the transport infrastructure, the water infrastructure. So for our case, that's the Port of London Authority and Thames Water, to the education system. And so if I could overlay those 5 into an energy co-op, I had some big hurdles to get up against, and so I'm just going to share with you what that journey has really built Energy Garden, and it now we have about 14 people that we're focused on delivering an integrated solution, which isn't just about the energy, it's about power to, for, and by the people. It's about trying to collectively work with the corporate sector and with individuals in an equal basis for that just transition. So I'm going to move to my next slide, see how that works. There you go, next slide. Yeah, cool. So what Energy Garden is, overview, community training, how we're delivering that ESG, because I think that's a super important piece for everybody involved, to communicate all of the good social work that we're doing and the environmental work we're doing. The investment community and the sort of, the English government doesn't seem to see the value like the Scottish government does. So really clarifying that to both the wider community. And then the sort of opportunity I think that we have for the wider community energy sector in developing a collaborative, cooperative for larger scale investment. So what is Energy Garden? Energy Garden is really educating from seed to solar. So we educate people in the urban environment around renewable energy infrastructure, particularly with solar, because I always call it a gateway drug. People, once they get solar, they get everything. Then, heat and recycling and renewables are all totally understandable once they see the sort of power that they have, not just the renewable energy power, but the people power they have by collectively organizing. So it's a not-for-profit cooperative, and we have a youth training program for education and young people from, let's say, 14 to 24. We've got a schools program for kids from Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3. It's all based on place-based learning. So we have community gardens. We've got 34 community gardens. You've got your community solar operation going on. So we're installing solar at the community gardens, as well as large-scale infrastructure onto train depots, hospitals, schools, and ground mount sites. And then we're also developing, as I said, it's a really important space for all of us in community energy, which is to look at the long-term power purchase agreements. The other renewables are always exciting. I've got a license to develop tidal power on the Thames, and I've been working with the Port of London for many years, 8 years, and that's still in process. And then other elements, we've been looking at how to be clean air. So working with Imperial College, we've been developed our own air quality. It's not reducing emissions, but it's shaping airflows to drop out heavy particulate matter. So those are sort of 6 areas that we really focus in on. But it's to have that health and well-being funded by renewable energy, where you have practical learning in a gardening network, where they actually make solar panels, as you can see in this picture. They grow food. They can be a part of these air shaping technologies, which allow them to reduce emissions, improve air quality. And to have that one vote, one shareholding, as all of you know, is fundamental. The outcome of having education and jobs and aligning it with the UN Sustainable Development Goals and the ESG frameworks that are out there gives everybody included, the community members and the corporates and the sort of larger investors, a real social impact. So that idea is always what I struggle with when I go into rooms of corporates and banks and everybody, to try to communicate to them that this is 100% community-led, that those people there are actually, they're gardening, but they're also investing, and they're collectively, they are the urban infrastructure, and we don't want smart cities, we want socially smart cities. So that it's a 100% community-led is absolutely fundamental. And when I say what does Energy Garden do, we provide the engagement officers, the technical, the financial, the legal support, so in-house, because we have 34 gardens and we have infrastructure projects all over the place. We're bringing in collectively funding to then be able to resource all the different communities for the projects they want: green wall, green roof, solar panels. But then the people themselves work on that co-design. They're watering, they're planting, they're weeding, they're pruning, they're harvesting, they're partying. That's their job. Their job is to come up with a decision and have a good time along with us if we can facilitate that. The youth training program, I have been running a youth training program for 10, 11 years in the city, and I've seen some horrible things. I've lost probably 6 kids to stabbings and shootings. But what I can say is I've gained hundreds of families to the projects that community projects we're working on by using a paid accredited training program for young people, particularly Black, Asian, ethnic minority kids who don't have any access to learning about technology of energy, or never even heard of co-op of energy, to gardens and growing and learning about all the potentials there. So we've been doing that for ages. And as you can see here, we do a pre and post survey. They learn about the finance, IT, technical, legal, media, and marketing of an energy co-op. Then they learn about the sort of financial opportunities and all the biodiversity, horticulture, how it fits into the wider sustainability movement. And this is just one section. There's about 64 different inputs, outputs in their assessment before and after of what they felt before and what they felt after. And this is a conglomeration of 64 young people who've gone through our program. You can see that I trust the people in my local community before 30% and after 60%. I feel a part of my community and close to people in my area before 30%, after 70%. This is the sort of just the more around community, because today we're on community. If I was giving my presentation for a longer amount of time, or to the finance community, I might have given you the statistics around employability or technical skills, but just to show the sort of across the board there's an improvement in their experience. So it's it's solar projects on different buildings, but it's also communicating to the wider community the benefits of cooperative energy. So this diagram, which is collectively coming together for a one vote, one shareholder investment vehicle to buy infrastructure to then give you reasonable returns in a reasonable amount of time. So I don't need to teach you any of that, but what a lot of the times I'm doing that is teaching that to the wider community, and I'm really excited to share that we've been communicating that to the great big bodies of who are looking at 10-year power purchase agreements, who are keen to pay or willing to pay a social premium for their energy. Not just we did the trial with Piccolo in 2013. It was the first project where we could sell our energy. We sold it to the Eden project, but they didn't want to give us any uplift. No beef, Eden, if you're out there listening. But that was the whole point of Piccolo, was they were supposed to give us an uplift, but they didn't. So we had to go out and build our own power purchase agreements. So we've been working with many different providers to find a sleeving arranger or a power company to do that. And when we finally found people that agree, we had to have a metric which assess what we do. Now there's a very integrated 42 input social return on investment, ESG, UN Sustainable Development Goal calculator that I built behind this with a full stack ramp developer, so that it's integrated and we can do this, and this is a moving piece right here. But all of the investors then can see this, and everything is tied to the proxies for the UK government and the National Health Service, and in our case in the NHS for England, around the value of working in specific areas around health and well-being, and so that's where you get your £3 social return on every pound invested. Some of the partners that we've been working with across London, some of the corporate power purchase agreements, but I think what the future opportunity is that we're right now. We've been working with National Rail and Greater Thames Rail to Go via Thames Rail to develop solar on some depots, which will then look at direct PPAs with them, and then excess being sold on. Here's some other examples on hospitals that we're working with to develop those, and then develop the gardens outside. And then we're looking at some larger ground mount sites that we can then look at sleeving those PPAs out. And I'm just about done. I think my 10 minutes is almost up. Let me just double check. Yeah. I think it's really important to say, not necessarily how you guys can help invest in our co-op, but I do believe that the wider investment community, there's a wall of money coming towards sustainable development. And in the UK, particularly with COP, and BlackRock, all these massive organizations who for the majority of time have been absolute horrible, unhelpful people, are saying, we've looked into the machine, and I can tell you the business does not have this, not because they are bad people, but because they run for-profit machines that will operate exactly as you would expect them to do, and that is fiduciary responsibility, having the highest return in the shortest amount of time. And they have realized that, and they want to work with community energy groups, but they have a trouble dealing with the vehicle of not having seniority of debt and control. And and you can see some quotes there, and if we had more time, I can talk about it later, of people who are, whether it's Rockefeller or Friends Provident, who believe that the model is a viable one of cooperative energy, and hopefully what we're working with. But I'm happy to answer those in the brief, and I don't want to take any more time because you have amazing other speakers to talk. I'm happy to answer questions at a later date.
That was great. Thanks, Agamemnon. Really good and brilliant to kind of hear that and hear about your project. We will we'll go from kind of London to Wales next and hear from Dan McCallum from Agony Co-op, who's going to talk a little bit about his project. Hiya, Dan.
Hey, Dan. Hi, Dan.
There you are. I think you're just muted at the moment, Dan.
Okay. Yeah, good to see everyone. Good to see Agamemnon. Yeah, we took a lot of inspiration from Brixton Energy Co-op and Agamemnon. So yeah, so I work for Our Lamon Tower. It's a charity in South Wales. Can you still see my screen?
Yeah, we can see your screen, but we can see the bit at the side as well, but we can see it clearly.
Okay, so the thing I'm talking about today is Agony Co-op. But as I said, we're a charity. We've set up two co-ops. One, a community wind farm, which is was built in 2017, and then Agony Co-op, which does rooftop solar. The wind farm just took a ridiculously long period of time, and we kind of worked in parallel actually with some of the Scottish community wind projects, which went through a lot more quickly than ours did. I think ours got turned down at planning about 3 or 4 times. But anyway, we built it in the end, and that's really what underpinned the development of Agony. And we also managed to secure a few different kind of grant pots to help reduce the risk of expanding Agony and to pay for the sort of feasibility costs, and to take advantage of the sort of tail end of the feed-in tariff. Wind turbines, about 20 miles north of Swansea. I still practically cry every time I drive home and see them. And a basic thing, we've won lots of awards, but I'm sort of very conscious that for a large period of time we were kind of a bit of a joke project, because everyone used to ask us, "Oh, have your wind turbines coming on? When you're going to get them constructed?" And it's always a bit embarrassing as to why we hadn't managed to do that. But obviously, now we're kind of widely recognised, and just trying to do more really to engage people and tackle climate change while we have got that recognition. So Agony, we actually started in 2014, installing solar panels on about 7 or 8 community buildings. But basically over the past year and a half, we've actually installed 4.3 megawatts on roofs throughout Wales, schools, businesses and community buildings. And we've got a kind of pipeline of sort of other projects now that we're looking at.
Hi, Dan.
So
Sorry to jump in, Dan. I don't think your slides are moving forward at the moment. Could you just put it on the slideshow? We're just seeing the Agony Co-op one. That's now on Agony Challenges.
Okay, I think I'll just show you. Sorry.
It's okay.
Yeah, so that's the slide I just briefly talked about, in terms of the 4.3 megawatts that we've got throughout Wales, and we're hoping more by March 2022. Obviously, our model was massively helped by the feed-in tariff, and that's changing going forward. But we did raise a lot of money through a community share offer as well, £4.5 million. And we also secured loan finance from the Development Bank of Wales to kind of deal with cash flow issues. But that 2.1 million has actually been largely paid off now by the kind of ongoing share offer, which is pretty much full now. Just these were some of the challenges. We did have funding to get staff, but that was just our capacity was one of the challenges. You know, we kind of knew there was lots of potential to get sites, but we had a sort of feed-in tariff deadline. But we basically had funding for 2 staff, Rosie and Alex, and they were critical. They both had sort of renewable energy degrees, but their kind of capacity was key to actually enabling us to do a lot more. And that's one challenge I think the community energy sector has got, is just the capacity of organisations to take on projects. And I listened to a few of the talks this morning, and that's obviously reflected in Scotland. Procurement is a big issue. You know, working with councils, you know, we're supplying them with electricity from the solar panels at a 20% discount compared to what they pay from their existing, you know, grid supplier. But at the same time, over 20 years, our power purchase agreement, you know, could be worth sort of £4 or £5 million. So the question their procurement people were asking, well, how can we just give that direct award to Agony? And that's going to be an ongoing kind of question that we have to answer, especially with public sector. And probably it's going to be going out to sort of open procurement, which obviously will affect timelines. And also just that it takes a lot to actually, you know, to put forward kind of bids. And I think it'll be interesting to see, you know, because I think commercially there'll be people that put in tenders, perhaps offering to pay like 30, 40% discount. I don't know. But whether they stick to that at the end of the final deal, when they really look at detail at some of the routes, will be interesting. Whereas we're kind of probably going to be much more honest about what we can offer. And that'll be interesting to see how that works within a procurement framework. We're also offering a sort of kind of significant kind of educational package, and to see what weighting that gets given. One of the other issues we have is just capacity within local authorities. You know, if they had an energy manager, some of them just didn't. And, you know, just the individuals that we came across, you know, made a massive difference really as to whether they wanted to work with us. But the critical one actually was Newport Council. They had capacity and wanted to work with us, and then that enabled us then to sort of get a couple of other councils to join. On each site, we need a 20-year lease and a 20-year PPA, and that you know, just takes a bit of time to agree. But certainly in Wales, it was easier because the local authorities own all of the public buildings outright. Within England, you've got charitable trusts and other sort of funny legal entities, you know, chains that own schools. I don't know, but I suspect within Scotland, you're probably more similar to Wales. The local authorities own the schools. And that does help because they, you know, the sort of land, there's no sort of other sort of entities that need to get involved in before they grant a lease. So that was really helpful. On the educational side, we're working with this brilliant charity called Energy Sparks, and it's well worth having a look at their website. They do work with several schools in Scotland already, but they hadn't worked with any in Wales to date. So we've now got we've got a total of 44 schools, and sort of most of them are now on the Energy Sparks platform. But it's a really good sort of data platform which shows kind of on-site gas, electric and solar generation, and then what further steps the school could take to reduce their carbon footprint based on half-hourly data. So I would recommend that, you know, that everyone really looks at that platform. We've also got an education officer who's just been appointed, and she goes out to support schools in their you know, further energy activities. The other thing that we've done as well as part of the business model is donate £500 of shares in Agony to all of the schools. And again, the idea behind that was to sort of try and get schools aware of how co-ops work, the potential of co-ops to get involved in entrepreneurship, and just to learn a bit more about governance of the not-for-profit sector. So that's kind of starting off. I suppose we didn't feel it was realistic for the schools themselves to invest in Agony. I mean, some might, none of them have actually to date, but it's just a way of getting them involved. And we also encourage visits to our wind farm as well. That's just one of our educational books that we've published. That's the existing portal with Solar Edge that we use. It's similar to what Energy Sparks show as well. And this is something else that I've become very aware of.
Dan, can you just move your slides again? We're just on Agony Education.
Okay. Can you see it now? It should be web portal. Yeah. So again, this monitors each of the panels on the roofs. And that's one of the things that we found actually when we're looking at sites, that lots of people have solar panels, lots of schools have solar panels, a lot of them aren't working because it's not in anyone's job description to actually check. And especially when those projects are being grant funded, where it's basically, there's a good link between the co-op business model, which depends on making sure that panels work, and the most effective kind of climate change action, to make, i.e. making sure the panels are operating. So we check everything daily to make sure that and stuff goes wrong, all sort of contractors out to fix things like inverters, or try and check if you've got like 10 panels that have gone down, is it worth getting scaffolding, etc., to go and replace those panels. Yeah, so the sort of monitoring side is really important. This is kind of just what we were trying to do, and I think going forward we're looking at just trying to get more and more installs and developing our educational platform. Going forward, up to date we've offered a 20% discount. I think it will definitely be less going forward. Some sites 10, maybe other sites 15%. We have to analyse their sort of on-site consumption and how much of the solar they will use. It will need to be larger sites. I think, like just to give you a comprehensive school will probably be fine. They'll use most of the power, but a sort of primary school, which typically might be sort of 10 to 30 kilowatts, would really struggle to sort of meet a kind of 6% rate of return, which Agony Co-op is targeting. So I think there'll need to be grant funding to go in alongside those sorts of projects if they're going to happen on sort of things like primary schools. And then working closely with other energy co-ops like Big Solar Co-op, possibly to try and jointly procure panels to bring down costs. Yes, there's lots and lots of potential, and there's some really good sort of co-ops across the UK, and sort of sharing lessons between them is vital. So I think that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. That was great. And it's amazing the level of participation you've had and the impact, that the co-op can keep having going forward. Laura, I think you're going to play David's presentation. There we go. Okay, thank you.
Hi, hello everyone. My name is David Bennett. I'm a director with Bespoke Community Energy, and I'd like to talk to you today about our experiences developing a wind turbine project with support from CARES. So first of all, I'll start with a bit of background on Bespoke. Unlike quite a number of community groups, we don't claim to represent the whole community of Falkirk where we're based, or any particular area of Falkirk. We kind of see ourselves as being a community of interest. And that interest is to try and improve the countryside access around the areas of Falkirk for walkers, cyclists and other access takers. We're set up as a community interest company, limited by guarantee, and anyone who shares our aims can become a member. So we see ourselves as being quite an open organisation. And we're also lucky enough to have quite good relationships with one of the major landowners in the area, which was helpful in developing this project. So why did we start to get involved in a wind turbine project? Because it doesn't seem directly involved in our kind of core aims. Well, we started the organisation in 2011 and we made good progress building new paths and bike trails in the local woodlands using a lot of grant funding. A lot of this came from Forestry Commission, but we also got funding from Sport Scotland and a number of private trusts. And once we had a network of paths built, we employed a part-time coordinator to organise events to try and improve the level of usage. But funding for that role dried up quite quickly, so we changed the role to a more practical one, doing maintenance work. That didn't work too well because one person, which was all we could afford as an employee, couldn't really do very much practical work without running into safety concerns. And at that time, there was local council funding available for employment readiness training. And we figured we could get involved in that, and we could take on groups of trainees, train them up in sort of countryside, forestry skills and things like that. And they could also help out doing maintenance and small-scale path developments. So our coordinator became a full-time team leader, and he had 3 or 4 trainees working with him on 3-month rotations. That turned out pretty well for the trainees. Many of them went on to full-time employment. But it didn't work that well for us because effectively most of the people working with us were constantly at the bottom of the learning curve because there was constant churn and we were taking on new people every 3 months. So we didn't find we were very productive. And we always knew the funding was quite hand to mouth. We didn't know if our current group of trainees would be replaced with new trainees in 3 months' time or whether the funding would just stop. We found ourselves really spending all our efforts working on other people's priorities. And we thought there must be a better way of doing this. So we decided to explore building a wind turbine in 2013 because at that time small-scale wind in Scotland was booming. We had quite a good range of skills within the organisation. We had a civil engineer, a mechanical engineer who actually worked in the wind industry, and also a project manager, and we had loads of enthusiasm. And from the start, CARES grant funded a feasibility study for us. Were very, very supportive. They appointed a project officer who came to most of our meetings. That was back when face-to-face meetings were, and he kept us on the right track with advice. The feasibility study looked at some local areas to identify potential sites, and one of the outputs was the map that you can see on this slide, which was one of my personal favourites. All the coloured areas are places where you can't put a turbine. For various different reasons. It might be too close to power lines, too close to houses, too close to streams. And in fact, the pink lines are point-to-point radio links, and we couldn't put anything too close to them as well. So the great thing about this map was it made the siting decision very easy because we had to put it in one of the white areas. And as you can see in the kind of middle of the map, there's 3 pretty small white areas. So the turbine had to go in one of those. The first hurdle was getting planning consent. Not surprisingly, there was a few objections, but we managed to get consent after a couple of difficult planning committee meetings, including a site meeting where we had to fly a big inflatable blimp at 70 metres above the ground to avoid any arguments about how high the turbine was going to be. So after the celebrations on getting planning consent, we got down to the detail of organising an option to lease the site and getting funding organised. We applied for a feed-in tariff, which guaranteed a subsidy per unit of electricity that we produce. And once this was granted, we had to complete the project within 12 months. This was a key rule of the feed-in tariff system, and it became quite a big problem for us. It soon became apparent that the landowners were having second thoughts about the project now that we needed their real commitment. And we ended up in a situation where we couldn't get the legal agreement to lease the site in time to meet the deadline for the feed-in tariff. So that meant the project was stuck for a whole year while the existing feed-in tariff expired, and that had to happen before we could apply for a new one. And we knew that the new one would be at a lower price than the existing one because that's how the system was designed. And then political events started to factor. The government changed and the feed-in tariff for onshore wind was completely scrapped. And we knew that a single turbine project wouldn't be feasible without that. So the project effectively went into deep freeze. And for the next few years, we explored various different options to try and make it work. We looked at buying second-hand turbines. We looked at selling the project entirely, various different forms of funding. And we eventually managed to get planning permission to increase the size of the turbine and increase the output, and came up with a funding model which involved sharing the ownership of the project with our consultants, who are also quite experienced wind energy developers. The government then reopened the feed-in tariff scheme in a very limited way for small community projects, and we managed to get back on that. And all the way through, CARES were really supportive, and we really couldn't have got the project as far as we did without their help. So we sorted out a new option to lease the site, which was due to expire in 2019, and we're pretty sure we're good to go again. But we kept running into further problems with funding. But by January 2020, we'd managed to organise a transfer of an existing feed-in tariff from another site, which was a bit of creativity that our consultants came up with. That expired in June 2020, so we had to complete the build by then. But we needed to renew the option agreement, and the lawyers working on that just didn't seem to have any sense of urgency. So we couldn't be confident we're going to complete by June, and the project had to go on hold again. And as it was the last of the feed-in tariffs, it looked like it really was dead. However, in April 2020, the government decided they were going to extend all the deadlines for feed-in tariffs because of the COVID lockdown. So that gave us an extension out till December 2020, and it looked like the project was on again. This time we managed to get all the legals sorted out, and we were able to start building in summer 2020. It took a couple of months to build 1.5 kilometres of road and start doing the foundations, but we didn't run into any significant problems. And we were able to get everything ready for the turbine to be assembled last December. By this time, we knew there'd be another extension to the feed-in tariff deadline because of the second COVID lockdown. So we knew we had until June of this year to finish it. And that was just as well, because we did run into some final issues in organising the grid connection, but we got through them. So what did we learn along the way? I guess one of the things we learned was that building was in many ways the easiest bit. Getting to the stage of starting construction was far higher. Lawyers need very well managed and carefully chosen. And your own lawyers might be great, but if the lawyers you're doing with on the other side are not so great, it can be just as much of a problem for you. Having really great committed advisors was a we worked with a company called LocalGen who were brilliant, and obviously we had CARES support as well. That was hugely valuable. And I think you just need to be prepared to be persistent and play the community card absolutely shamelessly, because it does help, it does open doors, and it does get you support where otherwise people might not provide that. So the turbine's now been up and running for 6 months, and it's regularly producing enough power for 700 homes, and it will continue to do that for the next 20 years. And while the project turned into a bit of an epic, I can only just reiterate the real message is that with determination and with the support of CARES, most obstacles can be overcome eventually. From Bespoke's perspective, we can now focus on our own priorities, knowing that we've got a steady source of income that we can spend in whatever way we want. It's given the organisation a real boost and a real renewal of confidence. And I'm quite confident that as an organisation, we will survive at least as long as the turbine with that steady source of income. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, David. That was great, and and it's your determination to kind of get that project through, really made it happen. Another CARES project to talk through now. We've got Angus Robertson and Nick Tordoff to talk about more vaults. So Angus and Nick, over to you.
Oh, hang on. Let me just now we've got.
Yeah, we got. Yep.
Let me just make sure I can share my screen. Can people see that?
We can, yes. We can see it. I don't know if you want to put it in presenter mode. There you go. That's good. Perfect.
What we're going to start with is a short video that we made for a conference, the Andrew Raven Trust conference that was held locally that was about community energy. So I'm hoping.
We've not got the sound, but we can see it.
Okay, I'll just, sorry, let me just unshare.
That's all right.
Sorry about this. Let me just, for some reason, it's not wanting to.
I'm afraid I'm not your best technical support on this.
No, I know what I've done. I'll just
Perfect.
do it and include that which Laura advised me to do last time and I forgot to do. So if we just go again with that. Sorry, I'm just trying to find the.
Hello, I'm Nick Tordoff and I'm Angus Robertson. And we're both directors of Morvolts Limited, which is a subsidiary of the Morven Community Development Company. Morven, we're a small community of just over 300 people with huge natural resources and a beautiful place to live, but with some significant challenges around sustaining a vibrant community of people.
I mean, the simple answer is money. It's all the things that we can do that we've got some money. That's us being honest. And we watch a lot of other people developing renewable energy projects and community schemes, and we're a bit behind the game. We've missed the best of the feed-in tariff, but we are here and we're more or less built and ready to go. The reason we went for hydro, and the blunt reason for that one, is it rains a hell of a lot here. And I've been in hydro for many years now and kind of hooked on it. But one of the best things about it is when it's pouring rain, dark.
Oh, we've lost you. I think you've muted, Nick.
No sound, no sound.
Yeah, I think you're on mute, Nick.
Can you hear my voice now?
We can hear your voice, yeah. Yeah.
I would think it's probably going to be the largest community-owned.
Can you hear the video?
Yep.
In Britain, and I think maybe even in Europe. And it's all about 6 weeks away from commissioning, so it's getting quite exciting.
I think the first thing to say was around deciding how we were going to fund it. And there are a number of different models that we could have used. A lot of the smaller schemes have gone for partially community shares funded. In our case, we didn't feel that was appropriate because of the way that a community share scheme in a very small community with really quite a large project would have meant potentially control of the project moving away from people within the local community. So we ended up funding it entirely through loan financing. Working with the banks has been an interesting exercise. We were very aware that their appetite for risk at various points didn't meet our needs or aspirations. They were extremely supportive all the way up to the negotiation of financial close, became very, very hard-headed and hard-nosed as we were negotiating the details of the contract. But once they are in a partnership with you, their interest is in maintaining that partnership and maintaining you as a viable operation. They are extremely helpful in doing that.
Yeah, I entirely agree with what you said, Nick. I think that the first bit, the planning, development, and particularly raising the finance, was just, as tough as it gets. It was really tough. And once we hit that financial close and press the button to start, it's been pure pleasure.
As a number of people have said to us, including John Heaton from Glen Hydro, building the scheme is the easy bit. Funding it and getting it all organised and designed was the bit that took the emotional effort and the support of quite a lot of people around it.
We can only hope that the scheme will generate renewable energy. Hopefully we'll be able to use some of that ourselves, turn it into something better, and hopefully it will generate income for us, and we can do all sorts of things with that.
And the other thing I think that we've learned is that we can do this kind of big scheme as a small community.
The sky is the limit.
Particularly it's full of water that's falling on our hydro scheme.
A nice wet sky.
A wet sky is the limit.
Okay, we've got a few slides. I mean, most of the slides really are summaries of what we've said in there. I mean, this is, and I believe Laura's going to share the slides with people. Yeah, three key factors for us. It was a relatively large scheme. We are a small community. This issue of just the number of available people to engage with all this work that needs doing is a real challenge, I think, particularly across the smaller remote communities. And the other thing that was important was that we had an existing charitable vehicle to work with. So that vehicle, that Malvern Development Community, was very much already part of the community. So as they say, levering the assets was the way that was really important to making this work. There's a slide there that sort of goes behind, particularly why we went for the 100% loan finance. I think the message here was we talked to quite a lot of people about the different ways that that they'd gone about this, and in the end, you know, it's finding a model that matches what model of community ownership you've got available to you, what organisation is going to help support that, and how you then use that to get the funding. So, as I say, I think every scheme is subtly different, every community is different. What funding is available changes constantly with different funding streams and those things. So there is no community around, but there's a lot of experience around who can help you make the right choices. What helped? I'd now like to replace this slide with the one that Dave did, from because that screen absolutely went into this. What helped was critical organisations in the if you like the government infrastructure, the public infrastructure. CARES was really important in getting us over really quite a tricky feasibility process to get this going, and their support. And at times we really had to stretch their envelope, and you know, some decisions went really quite high up the organisations to support us. We were very grateful for their willingness to do that. The other thing was the role of ETH and the Scottish Investment Bank. They were absolutely critical when the commercial bank that we're using, which is DRAS, had a wobble around some of the figures around the viability of the scheme. And they were also absolutely critical when COVID hit. The fact that they're in there with an objective of delivering energy schemes, particularly energy in the community, yeah, that mission focus that they have, rather than purely the commercial focus, was really important to getting us across the line. When COVID hit again, Laura Finlayson from ETH really went that extra mile, including moving large amounts of money across financial years and things like that. They were really important in doing that. Other things that helped was Angus here having quite a lot of knowledge about hydro. If you haven't got that in the community, what I would say is there are other people around who can help, and there's a lot of willingness to do that. Confidence in our engineering advisor, Glen Hydro, and yeah, a huge thing. We had a very experienced main contractor who'd done lots of these sorts of schemes, and we had experience of delivering good quality work on other schemes. Just a couple of pictures, just to show that there is actually now some water in the scheme. We did manage to launch this this hydro scheme, A, in the middle of COVID, and B, we commissioned in the driest summer on record. But there is now water in the scheme, and it is generating power, I'm very pleased to say. I think, and a picture of our turbine, which one of the things I learned, I had to learn quite a lot about foreign currency exchange to buy £500,000 worth of turbine from the Czech Republic. Sorry, let me just stop sharing the screen. I think one of the things, I'm not sure how much time we've got left. I mean, one of the big things for us is, what now? As Angus said, the main aim of this was to generate a financial income to the community so we can become more self-sustaining and less reliant on external grant funding for things. I mean, Angus, what are we going to do next is the question, really.
Yeah, that is the question. Chris, can you tell us how much longer we have?
Yeah, if people don't mind, we'll just run on an extra 5 minutes to take a couple of questions. But if you could kind of sum up in a minute or so. Oh, Agamemnon's got to go at 1:15.
Okay.
Yeah. So, do you want to just finish up and then we'll just dampen for discussion? Is that okay?
Just keep it to a couple of minutes and cut us off if we run over. Yeah. So I was just wanted to speak a bit about where we go next, because that's obviously the question that's in our mind. I mean, Morven is rich in natural resources, and we already, as an area, produce about 20 times the amount of power, renewable energy power, than we use, and there is a great deal more out there to use. So we've got a lot of scope. The community element of it, this is our first. We were late getting into it, but the community scheme alone, this new scheme, is producing about 10% of that power. So we're effectively self-sufficient plus quite a bit. We're looking to use more of that power ourselves. As a community, we're very interested in more than net zero and are starting to look quite seriously at that. We realise it's not going to solve the world's problems, but I think every community is engaging in this process now, and we certainly are starting to do that. So we have our own targets, but I think we're also conscious of ability to help other communities by producing excess power, and are interested in that today, perhaps thinking about how we can share that power amongst other community groups, cooperative. I don't know what it would be, but something. So that's a thing to think about. Some sort of free energy market, so we can develop that. I mean, the other link I wanted just to mention for going forward into the discussion thing is a curious one, because I'm fascinated by Dave's work on solar panels in Wales. And just to tell you all that in Morven here, one of our natural resources is silica sand, and it's quarried here, mined here, and it's 95% of it is now being used by Pilkington to make solar panels. So we're already helping to contribute to that, and that makes us feel good. So I think we'll probably wind up at that. Unless you've got anything else you'd like to say, Nick?
No, That's great. Thank you, Nick and Angus. And David, I don't know whether you want to join now. Agamemnon, I know you've got to run. You've got to go to another meeting. Before you run, just do you want to start off with kind of what policies or support you think might help accelerate action towards net zero?
Yeah, I really think that we don't need a step up. We need a level playing field. And one of the real key factors here, I mean, I know Dan and a couple of other you guys out there and women, we've been doing this for 11, 12 years. And I've worked on all sorts of policies for the EU and for the UK. And what we really need is there's pre and post legislation in place to support the energy infrastructure that's out there in the fossil fuel industry and the district network operators. And we're not seeing it. So I think that's the real key element here, is to have a open conversation with our wider communities around how collectively investing in cooperatives and not investing and divesting into our cooperatives and our banks that are not going into the place that we want to see will make all the difference. We don't need a leg up. We don't need any new transitional, I don't think. I think that we can do this with the current system and nail it down if we communicate with everybody all the great opportunities that is in community collectively investing into our cooperatives.
Okay, thanks very much, Agamemnon. Does anyone else want? Do you need to run now, or? Yeah.
Pretty much, but I can wait 1 minute or so.
No worries. Is there anyone else want to come in on that point around what would help support action? Yep, Nick.
I think one of the things that really strikes me, and this came out of listening to what was going on up in Orkney, is there's a real information imbalance between the corporate energy sector and particularly the grid and co-ops trying to come in. So one of the things that we really need to see is transparency around the data. So, for example, our local DNO is SSE. They know how much and where the energy in Morven is being used. We don't. If we need to know that, we've got to go out and do a survey. Now, that seems to me to be nonsense. This is national information, it's national data, and it needs to be shared with local organisations who are trying to build up the network from the bottom rather than having it coming down from on top. And that's not just around the energy. I suspect when we look into other things, there's issues around tenure, there's issues around energy efficiency of homes, that data is out there, but getting hold of it is incredibly difficult. And something around data transparency around energy and heat would be a real game changer in communities to be able to find opportunities to make a contribution.
Okay, thanks, Nick. I suppose just finally, and we have focused a bit about renewable electricity in this session, and just wondered as a kind of closing thing, the morning session very much focused about the challenges we have around heat, and if anyone had thoughts about the kind of projects we might be looking for going forward to try and decarbonise heat and tackle fuel poverty. I don't know. Dan, would you want to start on that, or?
Yeah, I mean, just one of the projects we're taking forward is a big ground source heat pump in this new building that we're developing. It's a sort of community arts enterprise centre north of Swansea, partly to create jobs, which is one of our main drivers. Anyway, so it's a 55 kilowatt geothermal heating system. We did manage to get the RHI extension, which helps a lot. And I think heat is one of the key areas that we need to try and move forward on, because it's clearly the direction of travel, as Sue Cairns this morning was saying. The challenge is trying to kind of get a business model that works for the co-op sector. And I'm not aware of really, any sort of significant projects anywhere else in the UK that have managed to do it. They've tended to be sort of projects like ours, looking at a large community building and getting funding for that. We managed to get it through a share offer, but only because that's a sort of financially viable project to support. I think on individual houses, it's a lot more challenging when you need to have sort of like, some sort of legal agreement with individual houses. kind of scale as well to make it work.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Anything from yourself, David, on either of the questions in terms of support to net zero or the sort of transition to heat?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is about educating, and I thought Agamemnon's presentation was really fascinating, just in terms of the amount of effort they put into engaging people in renewable energy and to technologies, and how I love this phrase that solar was the gateway drug. Mm-hmm. You know, and I just think the technologies are there. I think people lack the confidence to use them because, you know, they hear so many horror stories about, you know, rogue contractors and things that don't work. And then they hear lots of news about, oh, hydrogen's going to solve all our problems and it'll be along in just a couple of years. And I think it's very easy for people just to say, oh, this is all just a bit too difficult, you know, and it's not going to work. So I think education has to be the starting point. I think the work that's being put into decarbonising heat in community buildings is really important, because I think they can be examples that people can look at. You know, we can use them as learning tools to show people, look, this stuff works. And beyond that, I mean, I think there will need to be a lot more government action and a lot more government support to make it happen. But I think education has to be the starting point.
Great, thank you, David. I am going to draw us to a close there because I have run over a little bit, but I did want to have an opportunity to ask a few questions, to just run through a couple of questions. I'd like to thank all the speakers. I love this session. I love hearing what you've been up to, and I love the sort of determination and the effort to get these projects done, and kind of how you're already all thinking about, well, what we're going to do next, after I know it's been quite a painful journey. It's quite inspiring to kind of see that from you all. So, you know, thank me again. I hope you join me in thanking them all virtually for the speakers. We won't all come back together as a collective again. So from me, kind of thank you everybody for attending. We'll start up again at 1:30. And please come along to the focus sessions, because there are a chance that we've got some excellent speakers. We've got a focus on heat, on community benefits, on many of the topics we talked about today. So come along to these focus sessions, and they are a smaller group and a chance to kind of discuss and have time to really drill into issues. If you have any problems or you haven't got the email, you can see there's details on the screen to do next, to follow up from there. But thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this morning. I think there's been some amazing content, some amazing stories, and hopefully it's starting to give you some ideas on what you might do next. So I shall let everybody head off for lunch, and we'll reconvene at 1:30 and just go straight into your focus session and use the email we send, which will have the link for you to join whichever one you fancy. So thank you very much, everybody, and thank you for my team for organising all this as well. So cheers.
Cheers. Thanks.